Now it's time for today's perspective guest. And if you read the new book of my guest today, it feels like a collection of short stories, often very difficult stories, often centred around race. And in fact, well, that is exactly what it is. It's a series of fictional stories that, though, have a real meaning and a real message. Nicola Rollock is Professor of Social Police and Race at King's College in London. Her new book is The Racial Code: Tales of Resistance and Survival. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme. Explain to us, first of all, then, exactly what your book is.
So, good morning. Thank you for having me on. So, my book is non-fiction. And what I've done is I've looked back at research evidence, at data, at government reports, and I've pulled all of those together and pulled out some key themes. And I've crafted stories around those themes, because I think stories are a more compelling way of engaging different readers. And also, I've included end notes so that if the reader wishes, they can go back and read the evidence on which the stories are based. So this is a book, as you rightly point out, that's about everyday forms of racism, more subtle forms of racism. So not the explicit forms, so the overt forms such as name calling or racist murders, but what we see are the behaviours, the assumptions and the stereotypes that sit behind that.
Give us an example then, one of perhaps your favourite story that really sets the tone for the book, if you like.
I love them all, of course. So what I would say is that it's quite a creative book. So I'm an academic, and I would say that it's true that sometimes academics can be a little bit dry, a little bit boring. And what I want to do is really push the boundaries of that and think about how we can think in a really unusual way to engage the reader and drive home, yes, some of the pain of racism, but some of the strategizing that people of colour, Black and minority ethnic groups make use of. So, for example, one of my favourite is that perhaps the first one, which speaks to the experiences of Black female scholars, such as myself, within the academy. So in chapter 1, we meet our protagonist, who's called Femi, and she struggled in terms of receiving a promotion. And so what we see, and again, this is the creative aspect of the book, what we see is that her promotion's about to be announced, and she pushes back. And I won't do any spoiler alerts, apart from she announces in a really unusual way to her colleagues her dissatisfaction about the way she's been treated. That's part 1 of the chapter. And then in part 2, we have this oracle. So, imagine that you're in a theatre somewhere, maybe the National Theatre in London, and this oracle takes us through the reasons for Femi's downfall, the reasons for her pain, the reasons for this particular outburst that she has. So I really love and enjoyed, actually, the opportunity to think in a creative way, to push the boundaries, still drawing on academic practice, but to push the boundaries to engage with a broader audience.
Nicola, I absolutely love the idea of this book, and I love your enthusiasm as well, which is bouncing out of the screen at the moment. How's it gone down with academics, though? Because as you say, it's a really different way of writing and of publishing something from an academic.
That's a really good question. So I've not actually spoken to my colleagues directly about it, which is a little bit naughty of me, perhaps. But what I would say is that it's been picked up really well by, we have the main Bible of the publishing industry, the bookseller. It's been picked up as one of their non-fiction picks for the autumn as a highlight to read. It's been picked up by a number of reviewers in the theatre and the fiction and non-fiction industries. So I think that that's a really good measure of how it's going down. It only formally came out, I have to say, it only formally came out on the 6th of October. So we're early days still, and we'll wait to see what academics have to say. But look, let me say this in response to that very specific questions about my colleagues. It's true that we as academics are trying to think about how to produce knowledge in a way that still holds true to theoretical endeavours, still has that rigour, but at the same time engages a wider public. And we call that over here, we call that public engagement and also impact. And what is true with my work, I did a piece of work on Black female professors and exhibition. So I did the formal academic piece first, if you will, and then I took it to a broader audience by creating an exhibition. And I would say that the same is true for this book. That exhibition and the research that went behind it were extremely well received by the Academy and by the broader audience. And I would hope the same would be true for this book.
And that critique which I mentioned, which says the book has done more to help me understand the microaggressions that people of colour routinely face than any other book. Presumably that's exactly what you wanted.
That's absolutely what I wanted, because I think for white people, and let me be really clear, even though this is a book about everyday racism, it's not just a bemoaning of racism, and it's not just for Black people, it's for white people and Black people alike. For white people, as you said, that quote from the bookseller is exactly what I'm aiming for the book. It's to take readers, white readers who might be interested but maybe struggling a bit to understand the issues around these subtle forms of racism, these everyday forms of racism, racial microaggressions, and say, come over here and have a look. The way that I mainly put this is to think of being maybe in the Louvre or maybe in Tate Modern, and you're in front of a big painting, okay, huge painting. And I'm inviting white people to say, well, look, you've been standing here and viewing the painting in a particular way. So viewing the world, viewing society from a particular position. In this book, I'm saying, come over here a little bit, stand back, move to the right, take a different perspective. And what you see is actually what you thought was a dark spot on the painting, what you thought were flowers. Actually, because you're standing somewhere else, you can see that the light is falling on the painting in a different way. And that's exactly what I'm hoping this book will do in terms of shedding light on subtle forms of racism, everyday racism.
Just got time to ask you, finally, Nicola, I mean, why is this the area that you decided to dedicate your life to, I suppose? I mean, you mentioned you've also studied Black female professors as well. You're writing a book about racism. Why was the area that you wanted to focus on?
Do you know, I don't think it was that straightforward, if I'm really honest, but you keep that between you and me. Insofar as what I've been led by time and time again is the data. So it's not that I ever thought I want to study racism, because it's not an easy subject to explore, and certainly it's not an easy subject to explore as a Black woman in the field. But what has drawn me to the area, two key things. I've already mentioned the data. And then secondly is the persistence of the problem. Despite well-meaning, despite policies, despite legislation, we still find ourselves in a situation where we have the underrepresentation of Black people at senior levels, despite their qualifications, where we continue to see barriers for Black people and other minoritized groups across all segments of society. And this is despite being qualified, despite being experienced. And those questions have disturbed me, as indeed I think they should disturb us all.
Professor Nicola Rollock from King's College in London. Great to have you on this morning. Loved your enthusiasm as well. And the book is called The Racial Code, Tales of Resistance and Survival. So thanks once again.
Thank you.